NAFI would like to thank Sporties for sponsoring this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. My name is Sarah Stout. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI and your host for this podcast. Joining me today is Andrea Germanetti. Andrea is an airline captain and flight instructor specializing in upset recovery and prevention training. Welcome to the show, Andrea.
Hey, good morning. Welcome.
Thanks. We're glad you made it onto the show. Andrea reached out to me a while ago with his content, and I thought this would be fantastic for flight instructors because this isn't something that we normally get exposed to a significant degree in flight instructor training. So, Andrea, can you tell us how you became involved in upset training?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it stemmed from my aerobatic experience. I've been flying aerobatics for many years. And at a certain point, when the UPRT became something more of a formal topic, I started. I started doing some research on the topic and decided to use the basic skills of aerobatic that I've learned throughout the years and put them into a UPRT curriculum and developed a curriculum for the local fly school. And it eventually became a certified curriculum from the authority. And we just worked from there and we polished the curriculum, the syllabus, and it became, almost a full-time job for the school, providing UPRT training.
Oh, cool. So how long have you been doing the UPRT training?
So UPRT started basically and formally in 2019, and before that it was more of a emergency maneuver training. That would cater anyone who didn't have any regulatory requirement, by the way. So anyone who wanted to, look a little bit deeper into the flight dynamics and how to handle certain maneuvers and certain situations on the flight during the flights. And in 2019, actually, the European Authority came out with a mandate, and so basically everyone was studying towards a commercial or airline license had to go through this kind of training, and every school providing these certificates had to be aligned with the new regulation, and that's how basically we became involved, and it was a very interesting experience, completely different from aerobatic training or any other things. It involves a lot of skills and competencies, and all grouped in a small little package, which is very interesting.
Yep, thanks for sharing that background information there, Andrea. And to jump into it, what is considered an aircraft upset?
Yes, sir. So just a little bit of a historical context, and we used to refer as an upset to deviation from specific parameters like pitch, deviation, and bank angle deviations from what we basically experienced during normal training flights, and it became more of a common thing, thinking about an upset as an undesired airplane state. It basically is characterized by an unintentional divergence from parameters that we normally experience during training flight or regular normal operations. So it still involves, a deviation from pitch and bank and speed and thrust, etc. But it's referring to something that the plane is not meant to do, or when the aircraft is not doing what the pilot intends it to do, basically. So we lose control a little bit of and command of the aircraft.
Okay, so that's interesting because usually, as someone who hasn't been through this training, when I hear upset, I'm thinking of like some sort of dramatic event, but these could be pretty small deviations. I mean, obviously, you'd still want to catch and correct, but an upset doesn't necessarily mean that it's some big dramatic event.
No, it does not exactly. It's correct exactly, and also, we might refer. We always think about an upset as something happening up in the air, and we say an undesired state up in the air, but it could be also on the ground. You are taxiing, and all of a sudden you are, taxiing in front of a 747 coming in your direction, and there's no way for him to turn around and no way for you to turn around. So that's something undesirable. So, but basically, what we do is try to address, all these little divergences that, as you said, they don't need to be so violent and extreme, when they're up in the air, basically. And we try to mitigate everything else while we are on the ground, and we have all the time in the world to do that.
Okay, good. So thinking ahead. All right. So when we move into UPRT, so our upset prevention and recovery training, what is that? Like how would you define that term?
Well, yeah, it's very interesting. Upset prevention, the P in the UPRT is probably the most important of the acronym. It's prevention. So we try and prevent and mitigate all the risks that are, always present during any sort of flight operations. And so prevention and mitigation is at the very core of the UPRT training. So we have to think it like a pyramid. We build on the solid base of prevention and mitigation. And if those techniques and those skills don't really help us, then we implement the recovery training, which are specific recovery techniques that should and will for sure help us regaining control and avoiding an upset to become a lock-eye event, a loss of control in flight event.
So then UPRT is really its own highly specific and specialized form of flight training.
It is a specialized form of training because the ultimate goal is to enhance pilots' resilience. And how do we enhance and foster pilot resilience? And it's through the development of skills, competencies, and the confidence itself that this kind of training will eventually give the pilot. So we train the pilot to recognize and mitigate specific threats, and we use threat and error management as a framework at the base of our training. And so we call it specialized also because at the beginning there are a lot of topics that are thrown into the mix. By the end of the training experience, everything just clicks together, and all these sort of very highly specialized topics that they range from psychological effect to psychosomatic effects to aerodynamics and human factor, etc. They all click together. They come together, combine into something that really makes sense to the pilot after the training has been completed. And also, it's a very peculiar training because we bank on this sort of window of opportunity. So basically, it's everything we teach ultimately needs to be put in practice in a very, very short windows of opportunity, which is basically 10, 12 seconds, to recover from an upset and avoid this upset to become uncontrollable and become a statistics. In other words.
Yeah. Avoiding becoming a statistic is always a good goal. Um, Yeah, so
Definitely.
next we had slated to talk about why UPRT is so important, but I think you touched on it right there. Your window of opportunity to correct some of these types of events could be 10 to 12 seconds, which happens pretty fast.
It does. That's why a lot of emphasis is to mitigation and prevention. Because when you're faced and called upon correcting those, divergency, and you have only that little time, it's the extreme of
Mhm.
the upset and prevention recovery training. It's what someone doesn't really want to do, but if you're trained to do it, then you are better prepared and you have better chances to be successful.
For sure. And that 10 to 12 seconds would also have to include your recognition and processing time. That something's even
Absolutely.
going on, and then you have to formulate and act on your correction. So it's really not a lot of time.
No, it's not, and exactly the recognition and of the upset is paramount to recognize the situation, confirm what's going on. It's extremely important, and the reason why we train on UPRT is because if you're faced with something that you haven't seen before, you become startled. So it's going to be more difficult for you to understand, what is going on and choose, a course of action that will help you come out of that situation. If you've seen and if you've been exposed, then at that point you have better chances to, not to freeze and to proceed systematically and try and regain control of all the situation in front of you.
All right. Yeah, so that makes this really important because and touching back to those statistics you mentioned, you said up to 40% of accidents or of loss of control and flight accidents could be prevented with this type of training.
Yeah, unfortunately, statistics are still really, really gloomy, and 40% of all fatal accidents that they stem from loss of control in flight. So an upset is something that, if it's not addressed properly and timely, will become a situation where we are faced with loss of control in flight. And so working on these statistics, exposing the pilots, and it doesn't really. We don't do this just because some authority require it in a curriculum. It is something that every pilot should think about undergoing UPRT. But we do it just because the system and we've been exposed to a training system that has deficiencies, and it doesn't really matter whether we train for a private pilot, a commercial pilot, or an airline pilot. It doesn't really matter. We haven't been exposed unless we are coming from a military type training, or if we had aerobatic experience or some other kind of training that exposed us to a all altitude training. So that's the weak link. We haven't been exposed to all altitude training. So if you may remember when you have done your private pilot or commercial pilot, whatever, I mean, we train for, upset recoveries, and we look at attitudes that are really, really just a fraction of what the flight envelope can be.
Hmm.
So that's why if you are exposed, you can recognize this environment, which is hostile environment for many majority of us. And if you recognize that environment, you have a better chance to move around with more confidence in that environment. Put it that way.
Right, and particularly for flight instructors, because we're bringing along people in the form of learners who they're learners. They don't know what they're doing, with the airplane. All at least very much in the early phases, they're still getting things sorted out, and they're gonna be human and make mistakes. And so for flight instructors, this feels particularly applicable because of that element of someone else might be doing that human error or misapplying information that could lead you into the upset road pretty quickly.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
you
So
would
you're
have to be.
exposed as an instructor. You are absolutely exposed to this kind of risk. I mean, the risk is higher. Absolutely.
Yeah, in a previous podcast we were just talking, kind of swapping some stories, and I mentioned how I had a learner one time who had absolutely breezed through training, and in one of his final prep flights for his private pilot exam, we
Mm.
did a stall, and everything looked coordinated going into it, but that wing dropped. um,
Uh,
and caught us both by surprise. Now, granted, I was probably sitting back a little more than I should, based on this person's past performance had been so easy. I wasn't expecting it. But yeah, it happened fast, and right when I wasn't expecting it.
sure, caught you by surprise. And many stories of fellow instructors that were caught by surprise. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we are dealing with learners, and we are learners ourselves. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no every time you go up with a student, it's a two-way exchange of knowledge. Every lesson you do, where the instructor and the student, they both grow, and they take advantage of the experience. But definitely, it's something you want in your toolbox, some exposure and some experience in UPRT training as an instructor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the kind of the core components of this UPRT training. So can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So core components, we can basically identify the academic components. So all the topics that they will form the academic curriculum of the course. So we talk about aerodynamics, we talk about flight dynamics, energy management. We do look into high altitude operation, although for general aviation it's not that important. But we do cover high altitude operations. We cover some aircraft design and stability topics. And then what is very important is all the human factor side of it. So we do look into the psychological effect and of a pilot response and the physiological factors that we don't usually experience, and they are very important to recognize and be aware of those. So a big chunk of the curriculum is human factor, and it is extremely important. It's subtle, it's not as coded and identifiable as a practical technique, but it's very important. And then from the academic components, the theoretical knowledge components, we move into what those we move into the practical components, the one that involves flight training. So we do practice recovery techniques, and those techniques have been identified as universal recovery techniques. And so we try to expose pilots to various scenarios. We are in a control environment, and we try to reproduce scenario-based events that you might encounter during your daily operations, your flights, like recovery from wind tip vortexes, these kind of things. And also, we can use simulators. Mainly, the training is tailored for it on aircraft, so experience. We can take some of this experience also further into a sim environment for more specific, type-specific curriculum. And so those are the basic components, academics and recovery techniques that we go and practice on the aircraft.
Okay. Yeah, and so for podcast purposes here, we'll be focusing on those academics, um, and the ground knowledge. And but certainly, we'd encourage any flight instructors listening in to go seek out UPRT flight training. There are specialized providers in this, so do your homework, and it's out there to find. All
Yes,
right.
exactly. Yeah, there are providers all throughout the countries and not only in the US. And yeah, do your homework. I mean, there are plenty of incredible and high competitive places where you can get this training done.
We'll move on and talk about, our building blocks here. And we've touched on this already, so nothing in this picture should be a surprise here. But we build the foundation of UPRT based on these three blocks here.
Yeah, so the approach is typical approach that we have already experienced in aviation is a building block approach. So why we do that? It's because basically we need to be able to offer something that is modular. So at the beginning we need to create awareness and going back. Talking about how do we get to achieve these goals and become proficient in and provide a good UPRT training. So awareness is everything that is knowledge. So if I'm knowledgeable about the threats and the risks, and then my situational awareness will be a little, it will be enhanced. So I'd be flying around and I'd be ready to perceive this kind of threats in a much more natural way, let's say. Then we move to the prevention strategy. So, what do we do to prevent these risks becoming statistically, too much of a risk that a bad outcome will turn from this situation? And then if this doesn't happen and the prevention doesn't work that day, then we move to the recovery. So as we said before, the recovery is when we intervene in this window of opportunity that is really restricted 10, 12 seconds, and we apply the recovery technique. We recognize the onset of an upset that doesn't have, as you said, doesn't have to be something extremely violent, but we recognize, we take action, and we recover. And everything else is done mainly on the ground and through our experience, through the evolution of the flight. So while you're flying alone, you may look ahead in front of the aircraft and perceive some of these threats, and you start working on it and say, okay, let's mitigate this risk, doing this, such and such and such, etc. So awareness, prevention, and recovery, building blocks. And I think it doesn't happen in a day. It takes time to build this kind of expertise. It does build time, and I don't know if you heard about the crawl, walk, and run. It's what basically we expect and what we should expect from ourselves when we start exposing us to this kind of training. It basically every day after we have received this kind of training, every day we go out and fly, we build a little more confidence and we become a little bit more competent. So that's the basic fundamental behind the training. We have a lot of work to do. So the instructors, the UPRT instructors, will give us this set of tools basically, and then it's up to us to always look into this toolbox and make sure we recognize the right tools for the situations that we are faced.
Hmm. And I think even the proportions of these boxes in your image here give us a really good idea on how much emphasis should really be placed on that awareness and prevention. Even then being a little bit smaller because you want that awareness to even get prevent getting to the prevention stage
Yeah, absolutely.
and keep everything as precise and controlled as possible to begin with.
Yeah,
Okay.
so as we said, the base of this sort of pyramid shape is awareness, and then you go on. So the list you don't want to go into the recovery area, but if you need to, then you're trained to do it. That's the rationale behind.
Okay, so if someone were to go look for, a provider or an operator who's putting, UPRT training and into practice, what should they be looking for in that provider?
Okay, well, it's very important the provider is actually specifically provides UPRT training, because there is a little bit of confusion between what UPRT is and what is not. First of all, UPRT is not aerobatic training, so we don't go out there with someone claiming, we'll do UPRT training, and then you go and just fly a bunch of loops and rolls and kind of things. That has nothing to do with UPRT. So you have to look for a curriculum, a specific curriculum. That's very important. A syllabus. So like every instructor, good instructor or good fly school, look for the syllabus. Ask for to show to you the syllabus and the material that they have and that they use, and then ask for the instructor or instructor's credentials. It doesn't have to be Top Gun Maverick, but
Hmm.
it needs to have experience. Experience means exposure. So it's important that they had at least, being exposed to this UP. They did receive specific UPRT training, so they know what is important, what to highlight during the training, and also the equipment. I mean, when we are talking about on aircraft UPRT, it is you as I said, we are not flying aerobatics. So the main goal and the rationale is not to go out there and recover from an upset pulling 4, 5, 6 Gs. That's very easy to do. But you would ban any sort of aircraft, especially a transport category aircraft, pulling this kind of Gs. So throughout all the training, we try and respect an envelope that it doesn't go much beyond a couple of Gs, which is transport category flight envelope. Having said that, if you are flying on an aerobatic aircraft or an aircraft that has a strong flying envelope, it's much better, because we said it before, we are flying with learners, and so any sort of situation can unravel pretty quickly. So if I have a robust platform, it's much better. Long story short, if they have a aerobatic or utility aircraft, you have a much a wider margin on the maneuvers you're going to fly. So it's important. First of all, avoid uh, programs that are mixed with aerobatics syllabus. That's not what you're looking for. And question the instructor, the owner of the school. Ask them about their experience, if they're following, regulatory requirements and recommendation, best practices. Just be a little bit of a pain in the neck, and it's your money, so it's your right to shop for the best.
Right. And I like your suggestion of keep making sure you're not getting, you're not blending this with aerobatic training, but at that same time, utilizing an aerobatic aircraft can make this training more impactful. Because certainly aerobatic capable aircraft do tend to be aircraft that are designed to get into those envelopes where like the pitch and roll and all those types of things can change much faster than they would, or something like your typical trainer or your transport category is designed to. And so it can help you, having to react to those faster changes. It can help you sharpen those skills more so than something like your typical trainer, and then you can bring back those more
Yeah,
sharply honed skills into your typical trainer, and you can do your best to translate those skills for your learners, of course within the bounds of your aircraft limitations. But there's definite benefit in using those higher performance aircraft for a number of types of training needs.
yes, definitely. And one of the main things of UPRT is not type specific. So whatever maneuver, whatever curriculum you're following, has to be has to allow um, a sort of application of all these practice and these exercises and maneuvers on any sort of aircraft. Okay, then you will transfer to a more type specific training when you are studying for your specific type rating and you're moving into more sophisticated aircraft. So you're studying for your type rating.
Right.
So it has to be general concepts. But yes, aerobatic platforms are much more flexible and they serve the purpose. You know, with a wider, uh, I would say, safety margin than a regular one.
Yeah, sure, certainly. They have a much broader range before they get to limitations and things like that than our typical trainers won't handle the pitch and roll speeds and that as well.
Sure.
So of course the whole goal of UPRT here in getting the message out that this training is available, that this training is very valuable training for an instructor to have in their, experience bank, whether it's for their learners or moving on, in advancing their career if they move on to, flying those transport category aircraft, which we know is the direction a lot of flight instructors go. So this is really about enhancing the overall safety picture for aviation as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not only, as you said, it's not only addressed to those who will move into the airline business, which right now, as a lot of CFIs, that's what they will, the final goal is, understandably so, in for many reasons. But it's also for anybody that flies general aviation. So we don't have to confine this training just for people who are going to move onto the airline business. But it's enhancing really the aviation safety globally. And so it's very important that we do apply global standards and we do apply best practices that are, you know, reviewed on a regular basis from regulatory agencies, training organization, operators, and we need to follow these guidelines. It's very important, and doing that, we are also able to achieve I would say, a consistent level of training quality for instructors and for the pilots undergoing the trainings. So it's very important that we have a standardized approach to UPRT, and then share the knowledge. And it's very important. And of course, it's a very competitive world out there. So fly schools and operators they tend to be very jealous of their own material, and and it's understandable, but the knowledge and the experience really, I would encourage everybody, every instructor and every operator, to actually share their experience and their knowledge to the extent possible. No, I understand you can't. If you have a business, you are not dealing with a not-for-profit, so you need to make money out of it. But there is something that we can actually do share without imposing a loss on our operations, or on the bottom line of so sharing is very important. Sharing
Yes.
the experience and the knowledge is important, and
Yeah.
that's what we are trying to do. And I'm very grateful for NAFI to offer this platform and just spread the message, and make sure that everybody knows that there are ways to become more acquainted with UPRT, and it's something that is not extremely costly, and it doesn't have to be something that costs a lot to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And even for what costs, monetary costs, and maybe a couple of days to attend the training, you really have to view that as an investment. And so the return on investment you're going to get for having had that training, whether it's your current flying, passing that on to your students, or future career, the return on investment there is pretty high.
Yeah, you see this return of investment as returning to your family every time. So
Hmm.
it's a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
return.
It's not going to be a
You know.
financial return on
Yes,
investment, but you being able to assess risks better, to catch those deviations sooner, and to have better understanding of the corrections, to share that knowledge and experience with others. It's Yeah, yeah. So no, you may not see more dollars in your pocketbook, but
yeah,
you might in the form of a longer career, because you're more capable of having a safer operation.
exactly. Yep,
All
on point.
right. Well, that pretty much wraps up part one. Part two will be coming out in a future podcast, and that will cover some of our basic ground knowledge that we've hinted at. There's ground and flight training, so we won't be doing flight training on the podcast, but we can
Yes.
certainly talk about those ground topics. Andrea, thanks for joining us for part one, and everyone else, stay tuned for part two.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of NAFI's More Right Rudder podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe. You can get this podcast in video version on YouTube, or you can get the audio version anywhere you get your podcasts.